Hello, can I help you?
Oh, is this Billy Mitchell?
Yes, it is.
Billy, this is Dustin Wilmus from KMSU Radio in Minnesota.
Okay,
Would you be interested in doing an interview now or?
that'll be fine.
Excellent. Well, first of all, my name is Dustin, and I'm here with my co-host, Ton.
Hey there, how you doing?
Very good. I'm sorry, what was your name?
Ton, like 2,000 pounds.
Okay, sounds pretty heavy.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, we just had a few questions for you. We wanted to first of all know how you were first introduced to video games, how you got started playing.
Well, I was a hardcore pinball player, and I guess I'm the kind of guy who doesn't like new things. So when everybody started playing these video games, I was like, oh, the heck with that. And I just stuck with and kept playing pinball. And I noticed the competition around me was getting lighter and lighter because there were less people playing. Everyone was concentrating on video games. So then I sort of caved into the pressure because I wanted the competition. The competition was over on video games. And so that's when I made the transition over to video games. And I would say the first game I played hardcore was Donkey Kong. I guess the crowd around the machine and the amount of people who were all vying for the position to be the best, was one of the things that pushed me in that direction. Because I didn't want to play a game where people weren't very interested or there wasn't much competition. I was very much a person about competition.
Well, when did you realize that you were better than everybody else?
Well, it started, right there locally. I'd play my friends and I'd whip them. And it got to the point where where some of my friends, I'm thinking one in particular named Eric, he didn't want to play video games anymore. He always wanted to go to the batting cages or go into go-karts or play softball or something like that. Years later, he come back to tell me, he said, I really liked video games. He said, so you came along. He says, that was the best. He said, you came along, and I just got whipped. And he said, I didn't want to play him anymore. Well, he was good at all the other things that I mentioned, so he wanted to do those. And he was unable to tear me away from the game. And so I beat people just locally in an arcade. And then I started traveling to different arcades. I would see the high scores. If somebody seemed relatively good at a game, well, I'd sort of ask who that person is or whose initials those are. And it would lead me to different individuals that I would begin to play. And then I'd go arcade to arcade. And eventually I came to the point where I was looking up scores, and I was calling manufacturers, and I was saying, what's the world record on this? What's the highest anybody ever got on that? The only thing that was a bigger waste of time than calling the manufacturers was calling the distributors, because the manufacturers said, we don't know. Here's the number to the local distributor in your area. Call them. It was just a way of pushing us off, so to speak. And when I called the distributor, he sounded like a used car salesman. I could hear his voice in my mind. He says, we don't know about that, son. We just collect the quarters. You know what I mean? And so there wasn't any organized group or any organized effort to do it. And so eventually, thumbing through magazines, and actually somebody, an arcade manager named Kenny, who was thumbing through a magazine, said, hey, I've been working for you. And he says, look, I found this. And we opened the back of Joystick magazine, which at the time was the premier coin-op magazine, and it had a scoreboard in the back, and the scoreboard was a scoreboard that was basically the results and all the tabulations done by Twin Galaxies. And that led me to want to call Twin Galaxies and led me to want to call Walter Day. When I couldn't get the number, I actually called the publisher from the magazine. I called the publisher who got me the number, and the reason why is I even called the guy Walter Day in Ottumwa, just some old guy who answered the phone and said, I'm tired of you kids calling here, and he slammed the phone down. I thought, gee, that must not be the right one. But eventually the publisher, or the editor, of Joystick Magazine is the one that led me to Walter Day. So I called up and I said, hey, what's the world record on Donkey Kong? And he says, the world record on Donkey Kong is 1,493,000. I said, not a prayer. He said, excuse me? And I said, no chance. None. There's not a chance that somebody can beat me in this game. And he says, oh, no. He says, I know this guy. He got the score. I said, no, he didn't. He said, I know this guy. He's an upstanding guy. I said, maybe so, but he didn't get 1,000,004. He argued with me, and I said, give me his phone number. He gave me his phone number, and I called the guy. I asked him a short series of questions, which he didn't have the right answers for, and I called Walter Day back, and I said, nope, not a chance. No way. And maybe about 6 months after that, that guy stepped forward, wrote a letter of apology to me and to a great number of other people, apologizing, saying that he never did get that score. He never got that score or the score even higher than that. And his excuse was, because I eventually met up with him, I cornered him, so to speak, at a gathering at Twin Galaxies, and we played head-to-head. He played Donkey Kong, and he got 190,000, which would turn heads in any arcade in the country. That was 190,000 points in his game. I played, and on my first man, I got 849.
Wow.
So he later told me, he says, I had to try to discourage you, so he claimed a higher score yet of 3 million. And he has said since in interviews, he says, well, you've seen Bill Mitchell play. He says, the only way to beat him is to lie. He says, so I had to lie. So he and I are actually really good friends now, because I'm somebody who only laughs at the past and I only remember the good. But it was entertaining. But Walter always remembers that, because he said to me, he goes, that's absurd. He goes, nobody would lie about something that's insignificant. It's a video game score. So, but video games were all the rage, and everybody wanted to be the best. Everyone wanted, to be on top. And I guess it's not a whole lot different than athletes who, they do athletics. So many people like you and I, it's neat, it's fun, it's great to work and achieve. But some people, it's more than that, and they do what they have to do, and they abuse themselves, or they take illegal, whatever they do. So it's what people do.
Right. Well, eventually, this led you to be part of the U.S. national video game team. I mean, how did that come about? What was that like?
Walter had created a group of players that were hardcore players who, basically, as a group of players, we covered the entire gauntlet of video games, anything that was popular. And we traveled around the country. And we always, we were young guys, and sure, we liked to do things nice for people. That was always a bit of a cloak, We travel around the country and we do things, and it would raise money for cystic fibrosis or something like that. But the truth is, we just wanted to go around state to state, state site to state site, and basically we wanted to hammer the competition. So we did. We felt eventually it would lead to competition in other ways. There were meetings with Italian and Japanese embassies, and theoretically or hopefully we were going to put together an international competition, which we actually didn't. We did have people who traveled at times to competitions, mostly from Canada. But as far as an organized something on a very large scale, simply because of dollars, that did not happen. Not to us, anyway.
What was the scene like? Would you liken it maybe to like life on the road for rock stars? I mean, did you have like video game groupies or anything like that? Or?
Oh, absolutely. We were in a small town in Michigan. We pulled up one night, and basically Walter was driving, and we had to take a break because he had to shut down for a little while. So we just pulled into a small town in a square, and we look around, and there's an ice cream shop. Back then, if you went into an ice cream shop, you went into an ice cream shop that had video games in it. Not today, but back then it sure was. So we walked in, and it's busy because it's on the weekend, and we walk in, and basically we walk in because we're superstars, and we walk in and we tell them they are, and they sort of look at us like, oh, yeah? And so then we start playing games, and then everybody starts to gather and watch to see if we really produce the things we say we're going to produce. I remember on that night I played Centipede, and then people started picking up the phone, and people started calling, and people started gathering, and suddenly the ice cream parlor was elbow to elbow. You couldn't move in it. And it stayed like that, and people were oohing and on at every move we would make, and we would switch game to game at times. And it basically stayed like that until the manager decided to close up at 11 o'clock and put us out. And quite honestly, from there we moved on to the next town. Yeah, it happened quite a bit. There were times where it happened in hostile ways. In particular, I remember a guy. I sure wish I knew who this guy was, or I could find him today. Because again, I'm somebody who has fun with the past, and we went into San Diego, and supposedly this was a Miss Pac-Man issue, and Miss Pac-Man was like the hardest game, and that was the Oscar of all games if you could ever conquer it. And there was a guy there who was really good at Miss Pac-Man. Again, good. He would turn heads in it anywhere he went, and he just was stubborn. And he was very smart. He was stubborn. He was not going to believe that somebody could get the scores that I was claiming that I got. And so when I showed up there, he was waiting, literally like loaded. And I didn't know it. I didn't know who he was. I knew there was some guy who was there, who was going to be there. And I walked in and I started playing. And there's this guy staring over my shoulder. And he's got like a real intense stare, like he's ready to take a swing. Video games were a serious thing. And he's standing there. And I started playing, and I played through the easier boards, things that, he might have seen before. But then I started to get into the higher boards, and I started executing stuff just like as if it was child's play. And all of a sudden behind me, louder than you've ever heard anybody scream, the guy screams, "This guy's effing awesome!" I turn around, and he almost knocked me out of my seat with his voice. And I still didn't know who he was at that point. I just sort of giggled a little. I turn around, and I play, and I make another move, and he'd come out I mean, you would have thought it was violent, but he was just so excited at what he was seeing. And that's when somebody told me that was like the hostile guy.
Wow.
And so I finished that game, and then I started showing him and teaching him some stuff. And I mean, again, I gained a friendship out of it. Honestly, God, I truly wish. I don't even know the name of the game. Walter would know that, but I would try to track that guy down because once we got past that and I got to know him, he was a great guy. But
That's awesome.
I actually like the fact that he had a level of competition in him. The things I knew in the game, there was only maybe 3 or 4 of us that knew it or knew how to execute it. And without that, he was absolutely right. There's nobody could ever get that lucky. And there were people who were claiming, those silly things. So his hostility was justified. Just luckily, I was able to produce. Otherwise, I don't know. Maybe they would have carried me out of there because he would have started swinging or something.
Man, yeah, it's quite a different age now. I mean, I can remember going to arcades and just like what you're saying, big groups of people around watching someone play a game, and there's just not even really arcades anymore. So what are your thoughts on some of that, not having arcades anymore, or what video games have become?
Yeah, I think it's so unbelievably empty. I mean, I see kids play games, and I see them play, and they sit on their couch, and they play online, and they play with everybody around the world, and I suppose there's a value in that. But that experience simply doesn't compare to the experience. I mean, video games were great, and video games were popular, but it was arcades that made the video game. It was a place to go. It was a place to gather. I mean, it's like I talk to college kids, and that's not myself, but I talk to college kids, and I say, so you sit in your dorm and you drink your beer, and you're in college. Is that cool? And they go, well, yeah, I guess that's cool. And I go, or you're in college and you go out to the nightclub and everyone's raising hell and you're in there and you're chugging your beers. They go, oh, yeah, that's really cool. It's a place where people gather. Arcades were a place where people went and they showed off. It's a place where, champions were made, champions were born, and where, you had to put together, you had to produce, or you had to be shamed, or you had to shut up. Most people just should have shut up. But, it was. Arcades were all the rage. And occasionally, when you go to the right places, in the right states, and you go and you have or you capture some of that same atmosphere from way back when, sometimes it's not in an arcade, sometimes it's at a trade show. That's really awesome. I mean, it's really cool. It's, I said to somebody once, a guy who was a hardcore hockey fan, and I was at a venue, and I said to describe what it's like, this guy was hardcore hockey. I mean, I said it's a Stanley Cups, and I said it's Game 7, and it's tied, and it's in overtime. What? And you're there. I mean, right with box seats. What could tear you out of those seats? And he said, nothing. And I said, well, that was it. I said, that's the arcade. That's the arcade scene. When you go somewhere like I do, and you're playing and you're seeing stuff on that higher level, it's just like an experience. And I guess it's something that a certain generation, a certain age group understands, and another one doesn't. But they understand it on other levels. Like I say, he understands it on a hockey level. So maybe somebody else feels that way in a shooting range, and we see him on cable news.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned something about Miss Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, playing Centipede. You've played a lot of games. You've got a lot of huge scores on a ton of games. So what's like one of your most favorite, or is it? Do you have any records that you're most proud of or anything?
Well, I would say for sure the one that's the most memorable for me is Pac-Man. I mean, it was Pac-Man. It was a perfect score on Pac-Man. It was billed as a race or a competition between me and a Canadian who's, again, a good friend of mine now. And naturally, I won, or I wouldn't feel so good about it. But he, that story went around the world. I mean, it exploded. I mean, I did interviews in countries and languages I barely knew existed, and it brought me a ridiculous amount of attention. It eventually brought me to the Tokyo Game Show, September of '99, and put me on stage. It made me crowned the video game player of the century. But more so than that, it brought me directly into the headquarters of Namco, directly in front of Masaya Nakamura.
Oh, wow.
And his inner circle of programmers and marketers. And I mean, I sat there and I said hello to everybody. Nobody spoke a word of English except for me and the interpreter. And the very first thing I said to him, I said, this is the second time we've met. I said, we met when I was 17 in New Orleans for a photograph. And I told him I'd get him a copy of that photograph, and I said, you might say it was a 17-year journey for me to get back here in front of you again, which was 1983. The first thing I said to him, I said, there isn't a kid in the world who ever plays video games that wouldn't want to be in this seat, right here, right now. And it was interesting as I talked to him, because I always had this list of questions that I would ask these guys, these guys that created the world. And I would ask them this list of questions, and I'd finally have the answer that every one of us video game players always seem to ask, all these stupid questions. And so when I sat down and it was question time, I asked them about, at the end of the game, when this happens and that happens and there's a split screen and there's this, is that because of this and that? And it gets interpreted. And they talk back and forth amongst all themselves for half a minute. And the answer comes back. The girl says, Mr. Mitchell, we have no idea. We never thought scores like this possible. And I said, right. So I says, oh, and just kind of being dumb or not realizing reality yet, I says, well, I says about this and that, when this in the game and that, and I asked another question. And back and forth, they spoke Japanese for about a half a minute. And then when she says to me, she says, Mr. Mitchell, you know far more about Pac-Man than we know. We have no idea. So it went a couple minutes into the conversation, and the tide turned, and the questions began coming back the other way towards me. And that's when I realized, without a doubt, they were more impressed that they were seated before me, even than I was seated before them. And I sat there fielding questions continuously. And the one thing that I left them with, without a doubt, that video games did for me, and I actually thank Masaya Nakamoto. He's considered the father of Pac-Man, and without a doubt in my mind, the godfather of video games. Is it etched out a competitive, burning desire in my personality, to be the very best, and it transforms into everything I do every day of my life today. And so, that's the one thing I took from it. He was, a 78-year-old man at the time. He was ridiculously kind to me. I can't express the kindness and generosity he had towards me. And, without a doubt, that's the pinnacle moment of my video game career.
Awesome. Well, one thing we wanted to ask you about, when the film The King of Kong came out, you were kind of thrust back into the mainstream, so to speak. What are your thoughts on that film, or do you feel like maybe you were portrayed as sort of a villain in that film, or what are your thoughts?
Well, the first thing is, without lying to you, I haven't seen the film. I haven't seen any of the films that I've ever been in, any of the movies. But obviously I know a lot about them. And I always tell people that I know they did a lot of creative editing. It's a good thing they did, because I wouldn't want you to see the real me. The real me, or just how mean and nasty I am. So it's a good thing that they made me out a little nicer than I am. But with all that humor aside, the only disappointing thing with the film is, as it was being filmed and as we were being spoken to by the producers, we expected it to be very accurate, very, very historical. I guess they say the other film, Chasing Ghosts, is more accurate. But you learn a life lesson in the fact that, Hollywood does have its creativity, and it uses that creativity in an effort to make sure they create an interesting film and one that'll sell. But we would have been ignorant to think that it wouldn't have some Hollywood to it.
Right.
But we thought the actual timeline, the actual facts of the film would be completely accurate with a lot of flair and emotion and creativity. And the fact that, the timeline is what it is at different times, simply to make things fun and interesting. That part was disappointing, but I don't know that could really be changed, because if they did do a movie as strictly and as blah possible, we wouldn't be talking about it, because nobody would have want to seen it, because it wouldn't be fun or funny, or it wouldn't be anything to laugh at. And some people laugh at it, and some people get bored with it, and some think it's interesting, and some think it's stupid. All that, more than 99% of the people fall somewhere in that category. But when you get on the fringe, when you get the 1% on the far right or on the far left, let's talk about the far right. I've had marriage proposals. I get flowers, presents, gifts. I get pictures that I can't let anybody see over the internet. I get the most unbelievable, flattering things you could imagine. That's on one side. On the other side, I get hate mail that you would never let anybody read. I get death threats.
Man.
Wow.
So when people think that I'm intense about video games, somewhere there's people more intense than me. So, but again, it's funny, 99% of the people just laugh and think it's awesome. They recognize that there's some Hollywood, but they just think it's an awesome thing, and they talk about the experience of it and have questions like you do. But boy, those people who live on the edge, wow.
Yeah.
Well, are you still trading scores back and forth on Donkey Kong with Steve?
Not so much with Steve. There's a new guy in the mix. And not that Steve's not around, because sometimes I go places and I see Steve there. But for the most part, one of the things that I fall victim to, and I guess Steve falls victim to, is when I was a kid, I didn't have a worry in the world. I would travel. If I slept in a bed, I did. If I slept in a car, I did. If I slept in the alley, that wouldn't matter either. If I was hungry, well, I ate eventually. But when you got married and then you have kids, every year life deals you more and more responsibilities. Even back, say, around 99 and 2000, when so many things didn't happen, even then my children were little, and I had far less responsibilities, and every year that's gone on has been more and more. I have a daughter who finished college, and I have another daughter who's midway through high school, and I have a son who's not in high school yet. And that occupies somewhere around 99% of my time. And every time I say I'm going to play, I simply end up lying to myself or disappointing myself. The old joke is, when do you think you're going to be able to play again seriously? And that's when my son goes off to college. But I can't say that I have any regrets, because, my daughter, she lives in Manhattan. She has her college degree. She's doing exactly what she wanted to do. Both my other children are honor students. They both have tremendous futures ahead of them. If you can imagine, my son's in 7th grade, and he's already had a couple colleges call him that he's already gone to visit. As far as athletics. So I can't say that I have any regrets. I guess if I have a regret, I have a regret that there's not more hours in the day. So will that change back for me? Perhaps. But I squeeze it in wherever I can. And when I go out of town, in order to be, or try to be the right kind of husband and the right kind of father, I kind of have a rule. For example, I had somebody call me from Canada, and they said, "Yeah, we're doing a film. We'd like you to come by." And I said, "No chance." I didn't even let her get the words out, and I cut her short. And she goes, "Well, you don't even know what I was going to say yet." I go, "I'm sorry, I have a business, I have a wife, I have a home and kids." And I said, "I just can't." I said, I can't be doing that." And she said, "Oh, okay, thank you." And she hung up. And the next day she called back, and she said, "I don't mean to bug you." She said, "But, if you could hear me out." I said, "Sure." She says, "We're a small company. It would do us really good. We're getting started." And I said, it's nothing personal. I said, I have to keep my priorities straight. She said, "Well, what will it take?" And I think she meant money. And I said, "It's not a matter of money." And I said, and then a thought came to my mind, and I said, "Okay, here's what it is." I said, "You want me to go up there?" "Yeah." I says, "Me, my wife, 2 kids, 4 tickets." And she said, "I'll call you back." She called back, and she said, "Pick a day." And I said, "Because the kids go to school." And I said, "Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving." This was a couple of years back. And they don't celebrate Thanksgiving when we do. So on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, we flew there. Thanksgiving, we went over everything. Friday, we filmed everything. And then Saturday and Sunday, we left there, and we were in Niagara Falls for 2 days. So my point is, I had a family vacation out of the work that I was doing.
Sure.
So that lets me have the fun, but it keeps me a family guy too. So That's the kind of thing I try to do right now. I have people call from talk shows, and they want me to go to L.A. and be on a talk show. I say it'll cost you 4 tickets.
Sure.
Sometimes 2 tickets. If my wife and daughter are busy with cheerleading, well, then it would just be me and my son. Some say yes, and some say no. Some people think it's outrageous that I would make that request. Oh, wow.
Well, how did you end up getting into, you own a restaurant now, right?
Yeah, the restaurants are, they were here in 1955, and I actually began working with my father as far back as 1978 as a young tyke. And in 1986, as the golden age of video games was coming to a close, an organized contest such as what was done by Twin Galaxies was coming to an end. And I was 20 years old, and I looked at my situation. I said, I can't do this forever. as I say, the obsession or the drive and desire to be the best, continued onward. It was my choice to say, I'm going to do what I do better than anybody else. And that's when I got into the business of chicken wings and hot sauce. And it's just a driving force there. And now, all these years later, see, the restaurant involves mother and father and sisters and me. And, well, family means we all fight like hell. So that actually has less of my time. The truth is, what occupies my time most of the time in the work world is the hot sauce company, because I always tell people the only boss I have there is my wife. So.
Well, tell us about the hot sauce.
Well, basically, what it was we began serving wings down here in the late 70s, and we weren't satisfied with the sauce or the quality that there was. So we began to, with the help of an old friend, we began to develop one that we thought would be better than anybody else. And as the years went on, actually sometimes in the 80s is when we really got our foothold really good. And basically it's in certain areas, it's in certain places, and it's really strong. For example, in Sam's Club down in this area, to be one. Let's see, you're in Minnesota. Wow. There's a Sam's Club in St. Louis Park, and there's a Sam's Club in Grand Fork, North Dakota. Those are the two closest ones to you. And it's sold by many food distributors in certain areas. And in your area, the closest one would be out of Des Moines. But no, it's done tremendously well for me. Tremendously.
And it's called Ricky's World Famous Hot Sauce, is that right?
Yeah. Officially, it's Ricky's World Famous Sauce. There's a hot sauce. There's a wing sauce. There's a medium wing. There's a mild wing. There's a jalapeno. There's a habanero. So there's a lot of different variations. Cool,
man. Can you buy it online at all, or mostly at Sam's Club is where we could find it?
Yeah, mostly at Sam's Club. If you go online, you can go to the 800hotsauce.com. You can get it there.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, with all the stuff you got going on, we really appreciate you taking time out to talk with us today.
Well, you hit it at the right time. I always tell people the only time I have time is when I'm in the car. And I was just getting in a car when you called.
Okay.
Awesome. Well,
it used to be years ago, before the days of cell phone, people would have salespeople call saying, they wanted to sell me, a mobile phone for my car. And I said, the car is the only place I get a break. I guess it still is, but I spend conversations on it.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
All right. Thanks so much.
You bet. Good day to you. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.